Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we have a really spicy Nicol Bolas, the Ravager deck list. This is a very high-powered dragon tribal deck. This deck comes to us from Callisto, who says some cards need to be cut. But overall, I'd love your advice, feedback, as this is Nicol Bolas, a pet deck for me. The theme is Dragon Tribal with sub-theme of Reanimation. Primer is added. They have no restrictions, aiming to compete at power level 7-8, but not quite CEDH. So, I feel like I've got a lot to say, and this is a very funny, very strong deck. So before we get into it, this is a great time to remind you that if you'd like to send in your own deck to me, there is a link in the description down below. And there is also a link that if you want your deck to be the next video I make, that I work on your deck next, there is a link that you can bring it up in the queue. Finally, if you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're looking at today by yourself, and I really recommend you do, there's a link for that as well. This is quite a deck. All right, Nicol Bolas, the Ravager. What do they do, and why are they the leader of our pet deck? Well, Nicol Bolas is a 4-mana flying elder dragon in Grixis colors. That's blue, black, red. When Nicol Bolas enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card, and for 7 total mana at sorcery speed, you can transform Nicol Bolas to his planeswalker side, which is Nicol Bolas, the Arisen. This is a legendary planeswalker with 7 loyalty, +2 to draw 2 cards, -3 to deal 10 damage to creature or planeswalker, -4 to reanimate any creature or planeswalker from any graveyard, and -12 to exile all but the bottom card of target player's library. Now, let's look at the deck itself. And what we have here is a very strong deck. And this deck is really interesting to me because I'm kind of taken aback by the sheer power level of it. Now, it's clear that Callisto is very interested in this power level, so I don't think it's a problem, but if you were coming over to my house and we sat down beforehand and asked, what deck are you bringing? And you said to me, you're bringing your Nicol Bolas pet deck? This is not what I'd expect. You know, like, I feel like maybe there's just a difference in the idea of what a pet deck means. But in my mind, a pet deck is like people sitting on chairs tribal. Not, you know, this immensely powerful deck that happens to have dragons in it. If we take a look at this deck is meant to be power level 7-8, not CEDH, and I think it's close. You have almost all of the markings of CEDH, minus one thing which we will get to, but we have, you know, a ton of tutors in Imperial Seer, Demonic Tutor, Grim Tutor. Over here we have Mystical Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, Sarkhan's Triumph is a tutor technically. We have free counter spells and free interaction, which is another incredibly important thing in CEDH. And then we have fast mana. Not a lot, but a few really strong fast mana pieces. The one thing that we're missing, oh, I will also say we're running cards like Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study, which are also known as being very strong cards, especially in CEDH. What we're missing, and I guess missing is the wrong idea, it's more what we've included. And what we've included is our 24 dragon and dragon support creatures. And these are decidedly the cards you wouldn't see in CEDH. If we removed every one of these cards, it wouldn't be a dragon deck. That's fair. But it also would be prepared to become a CEDH deck. Now, obviously, those 24 cards we put in would be very different, but I'm going to suggest that's the thing that kind of catches my eye the most. I've said a few times that people will bring, bring kind of certain tribal decks or creature-based decks whose power level might be lower on the scale, and then they support these strategies with really, really high-powered support cards. This is like an extreme version of this, because I'm not going to sit here and say dragons are weak. Dragons are very, very strong, but dragons are a weaker or middle tier strategy generally because they rely on casting very, very high mana creatures. Very high mana creatures whose power and toughness are generally made for a 20 life format and not a 120 life format across 3 opponents, right? If we look at I think that's an I, right? So Imrith, Desert Doom, who is a 5/5 flyer for 5 with ward as long as it's untapped, and when deals damage draws you a card or more. This is not on the same power level as the rest of the deck, right? And I think that's really interesting to me to mix these two ideas together. So the simpleness of kind of adjusting this deck will really depend on exactly where you'd like the power level to stand. You were mentioning cuts. I can suggest tons of different kinds of cuts, but the general line is this. If you would like the deck to be weaker, you cut non-dragon creatures. If you want the deck to be stronger, you cut dragon creatures. That's unfortunately the kind of setup. Now, I imagine Callisto knows this. They've built this deck for a reason, right? And this deck is a lot of fun. It has all of the makings of a CDH deck with a bunch of really funny win cons. One of them being World Gorger Dragger and Animate Dead, which may not be currently a CDH finisher, but it has been in the past. So this is very, very close, right? So the direction ends up kind of being, once again, do we want to power up or do we want to power down? Now, I'm going to try to avoid both of these things. I want to try to suggest cards that are in theme and in power. And then it'll be up to you to decide what you want to cut. I will make some suggestions. If we would like to power up the deck, things like Eben Death, Draco Lich, Imrith, Kolagon, the Storm's Fury, and, well, I mean Dragon Lord Kolagon, because all it does is give haste. Those would be some examples of cards I would cut, or most likely Niv Mizzet. Those would be the dragons I would cut if we're cutting dragons. And if I was playing this deck, I would beg you to let me cut some of these dragons, but it's also the point of the deck, so let's look at what we can cut outside of the dragons. Well, Fact or Fiction feels a little underpowered for everything else the deck can do at 4 mana. Grim Tutor, likewise, feels a bit too much mana at this level. I think I'd rather Profane Tutor or Diabolic Intent. Anything to just reduce the mana from 3, because 3 is quite a bit. Let's see. Kindred Discovery is not the card that we want. This is just a 5 mana Guardian project, basically. I do recognize it does trigger on attacks, but these kind of whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, you draw abilities, work on decks with much lower CMC for their creatures. So if we adjust that and say, well, instead of playing a deck that can play 2 creatures per turn, you're playing a deck that can play a really big creature but also get to draw when that big creature attacks, I'm going to split the difference and say they're very, very similar levels of cards. And I think that that level is a bit weak for this deck. Kindred Discovery is a lot of mana to set up playing your dragons. So I don't love that. Crux of Fate, I can't really get rid of it because it's on theme. And so we'll leave that. Damnation might be worth cutting at that point, because Damnation, at this power level, I don't want this many board clears, right? Toxic Deluge and Crux of Fate should be enough. what we can do if we ever feel the need is we can tutor into them, so we're not too worried about hitting those cards. Herald's Horn is interesting to me. I don't really like it. I think it is... Okay, so mana reduction effects. If you're casting one of the card that's getting reduced per turn, this card is a mana rock. If you're casting 2 per turn, then it is a huge advantage. With that in mind, dragons are really bad at casting 2 a turn. So that first part of the text is pretty bad if you ask me. The second part that says at the beginning of your... I guess I should make this a little bigger. The second part that says that at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a dragon, draw it, is also not really impressive to me because it is... you have 24 dragons, right? That's just about a quarter of your deck. 1 in 4 turns to flip a dragon on average is not great. And with that in mind, I don't really like the Herald's Horn, and I think that can be cut pretty easily. All right, before we go into additions, I'm just taking a look through here. So Astral Dragon, I think, should be played. I think it's one of the strongest... I think it's one of the strongest ones here, right? Because you can get really, really good permanents. You could reanimate this pretty cheaply. I think this card is very, very good. I think I would play this for sure. The rest here, I don't think I particularly care for. Hellkite Charger works with certain infinite combos that you don't have, but it is something to consider. Manaform Hellkite is particularly bad because a lot of your good spells to cast are instant speed, which means if it's not your turn, which it probably isn't, you're not taking advantage of them. Crucible of Fire is profoundly funny to put into this deck of some of the strongest cards to put Crucible of Fire into. So I'm going to say don't play this, but at the same time, nothing will flex on the rest of your opponents where after you've played, you know, Rhystic Study to curve out with Crucible of Fire and then protect it with Fierce Guardianship is the funniest thing I've ever heard. And if that's the person you want to be, you should absolutely play this. Sword of Feast and Famine, you don't have enough attackers that I particularly like it, so I wouldn't do that. Cursed Mirror is really, really interesting to me. It's unfortunate that the best hit is probably your commander, which is not ideal. But beyond that, I mean, getting Atsushi or getting Kakusho is probably good enough. So I'll leave that for you to decide. And the rest are okay. Don't play Sprite Dragon. This isn't where you want to be. I mean, if I said that, there would be a lot of things that you don't want to be at. Sprite Dragon is just too little damage otherwise. Okay. Okay. I noticed that a lot of the cards here are very special art. If that's part of the idea, some of the cards I'm going to suggest might not have that special art. As our viewers might tell, and I'll probably put in the thumbnail, this deck is almost $8,000 American. Good luck funding that is what I want to say. But that being said, these are all special versions of the card. You could probably get a lot of these cards cheaper, but I don't know offhand how much that would be. It would still be a very expensive deck, mind you. So let's look at what my additions are to keep in theme of our dragon, the power level of our dragons, but also to keep in theme with the kind of strategies that we want. Well, let's start with a card that I just think should be in here, and that's Necropotence. You have the mana, you have the colors, you have the power to back it up. You should absolutely play this. Don't play Phyrexian Arena. You're playing dragons, and you're playing Nicol Bolas. He wants ultimate power, and here is ultimate power. This is a very, very polarizing card, especially in a deck where you have no life gain whatsoever. That's not true. You have some life gain, but like no reliable life gain. This is going to be great. this is going to be great. You're going to play it. It might get you killed every now and then, but isn't that worth it? Isn't that what Nicol Bolas would do? Absolutely play Necropotence. After that, I was thinking of ways to protect Necropotence. I don't think you'd be too sad to have... Nicol Bolas. I don't think you'd be too sad to have a slip out the back. Just to protect him while he's a creature, and just to protect some of your other creature, like your really powerful creatures in the deck. So a 1 mana kind of protection spell that also can phase out your opponent's creatures, I think, is rather strong. Likewise, a fresh new one, Not Dead After All, for when you want your dragon to have the ultimate villain comeback right when they thought they'd finally dealt with it. Now, at this power level, I don't expect Nicol Bolas to be destroyed often, but in these situations, Not Dead After All is going to be very, very good. Especially if you have his activated ability on the stack, and someone goes to, like, destroy him out of the game with, like, Beast Within or something. Not Dead After All not only will bring him back, but will also get another trigger of his ability, something I like quite a bit. In addition, as mentioned before, it's also really, really good with a number of your dragons, so you'll be pretty happy to have this on hand. Next, or the last few cards that I have, are all on the reanimation theme. You're very much so set up to win with Animate Dead and and World Gorger Dragon. For those who don't know, this is an infinite combo where the two cards will blink in back and forth over and over again. And so, with that in mind, having a way to ensure World Gorger Dragon is in the graveyard, because otherwise there's really not a lot of options to put it into your graveyard yourself, is going to be important. So Entomb is the easiest one at 1 mana, but I want to also point out Unmarked Grave, which is also very, very strong because that'll hit it as well, but also will hit any non-legendary card. And finally, the more expensive but more efficient version of this is Buried Alive, which is just generally fantastic for putting like several reanimation targets into your graveyard all at once. Also, that art is metal. So actually, all of these arts are metal. Unmarked Grave is just a little weak, but I love this art so much. After which, we do like higher mana cost finishers around here from what I've seen with all the dragons. So how about Command the Dreadhorde? Summon several dragons from your graveyard all at once, or steal several of your opponent's creatures and planeswalkers. This is great because, as we can see here, it is on theme as you're reanimating Bolas's army and subjugating Liliana all at once. Exactly what we want. Finally, though not Bolas, nothing is more of an evil act than Breach the Multiverse, an incredibly strong card that reanimates a giant swath of creatures. Well, I guess the giant is the size, not so much you get 4 creatures, but you get to pick from all graveyards, and you get to mill 10 first to ensure something is worth hitting. Those are the things that are generally what I'm thinking about. Now, this video is a little short. I might have a few more things to say here, but the thing is, this deck is mainly complete. Like, this is a bit of a tricky deck to work on. Sorry, there's a loud dog outside. I'm going to close my window. This deck is a little tricky to work on because it's so unique to the deck builder, right? This is not something I can see anyone but Callisto make, right? This is... It's genius, and it's a little insane in its genius. Like, this is so strong, and I love it so much. You know, you bring this to a table where everyone's playing high-powered cards, and they underestimate you because you tell them they're playing Nicol Bolas Dragon Tribal, and then you put them through the shredder with this kind of deck. I absolutely love that. And with that in mind, the changes are difficult to do. A lot of these dragons, like, despite the fact I like this, the argument, the most literal or like the most objective argument is that the dragons are holding back the rest of the deck. you can do with that information what you want, right? Because we already know that. That's not a surprise. But the main thing is that if we are keeping those dragons, we might as well keep all of them. Or, you should be keeping the ones you like the most. There are definitely dragons here that are much stronger than the others. Decadent Dragon and Expensive Taste are so much better than Imrith Desert Doom, or so much better than Niv Mizzet Draco Genius, because this is just a very strong and very playable, both effects are really, really good. A mana ramping dragon at 4 mana is not too bad. An Expensive Taste as an instant gain 2 cards off the top of your opponent's deck, especially after they scry or something, or especially after they vamp tutor, is really, really good. So obviously one is better than the other. But you know this, so there must be a reason known only to Callisto why Imrith is in here, or why Ebon Death is here, right? These cards are just not at the power level of the rest of the deck, so I think maybe it's because of the alternate arts, maybe it's a fondness for these creatures, I'm not too sure. So with that in mind, I don't want to go through and tell you which ones to cut. Like I said before, we'll go into a bit of a conclusion mode here. When it comes to non-dragons and non-dragon, theming to cut, I find Fact or Fiction to be particularly weak here. I find Damnation to be weaker than your other options. Herald's Horn feels weak, and Kindred Discovery also seems weak. Are these cards bad? No. These cards are all very, very strong cards in the right decks. But the power level of this deck is so high that these are the weakest non-dragon themed creatures that I can recommend cutting. And I think for you, besides playing Necropotence, is to feed a little more into the reanimation sub-theme. You have a lot of really, really strong reanimation cards available to you. You have a bunch of Entomb effects that you aren't playing that I think you should, and then playing some mass reanimation could be rather fun. Heck, if you really, really wanted to, you could get away with playing Rise of the Dark Realms, which is as known as being the ultimate reanimation card. And if you want it on a more evil way, you could instead play Sheoldred, who has on her Saga side Rise of the Dark Realms right down here. So it'll be a little cheaper to cast, much more powerful generally, and a little more fun to get working. But that's really it. I think this deck is so cool and so fun, and I really like what you're going for here. The price tag scares me. And if you are able to afford this, good for you. This could be a long-term project for you that you've been putting together for a bunch of time, and it's really impressive. And I do think it looks like a really, really fun deck to play. But this is about quite a bit of ways into the cost of my wedding, so I could not build this myself. Once again, if someone's interested in building this without all of the foiling, let's say, for example, I'm sure this number would go down quite a bit. But as it is, I think the deck's great. I don't think there's a lot to change. The suggestions I've made, I think, would make it better. But in the end, this is such a unique and personal deck. You will be able to know exactly what you want in the end. I hope this deck as this video was helpful to you. If you'd like to send me another deck to take a look at, you can go into the video description and find the link to the forum to do that. And if you'd like your deck to be the next deck I work on, there is a link to that as well. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, it always helps the channel, and I would be very, very happy if you did that. Let's go back to, I don't know which one I'm going to use for the art. I kind of like both of them. I think I know, so I'm not going to say it, and I'll surprise myself later. But this is such a great deck. I really thank you so much for saying it, Callisto. This is so funny to me, and I hope you have a group that matches the level of this deck, because this is fantastic. I will say, for some people, this might be closer to a power level of 9, and there's no easy way to undo that. there's no one card. I guess this is what I'll end in. I have a few minutes. So let's end this video on a power level talk. A really brief one because some people will have already stopped it. But here you go. The power level conversation between 1 and 10 in CDH is made up, right? It's just objectively false. I just talked to a friend of mine who said the power level for him at 9 and 10 you are in CDH, but to me the power level goes to 10 and then CDH. So already the numbers mean nothing. The thing is that power levels, especially near the top end, are not so much a card choice, but a design choice. So a deck that has free counter magic, you can't just remove half the counter magic and then all of a sudden it's lower power. Like, though technically it is, because it's lost half of its free counter spells, it's still at a higher power because it has access to those spells. So in order for this deck to power down below a certain level, it would need to be fundamentally changed. And I don't think that's possible, and I don't think you should do that. I think the deck is fine as it is, but at this power level, with like all of the fast mana, all of the free spells and tutors, I would say this is almost a 9. For me, because after that, we do go into CEDH after 10. So to me, it is kind of a 9. If you think 9 and 10 are CEDH, then yes, this is an 8, I would say. But I leave that for the viewer to decide because, like I said, like money, it's made up. The numbers are made up. They're not real, right? All right, Callisto, good luck with this wonderful deck. And I hope I don't sit across from you with it without knowing what it is. I think this deck would eat me up very, very quickly.